Now that it's almost mid-July, I think it's time for a May and June wrap-up. Hi, I'm Colleen. If you're new here, I talk about books and writing. Today we're going to talk about all the books I read in May and June because summer's a mess for me when it comes to filming, and so I never actually get anything done in time. But I did read 13 books combined in those 2 months that I would love to talk to you about. So we're just going to do it now, okay? Cool. Quick aside, if you have fun today, like, subscribe, comment, whatever. Yeah. The cool thing is I'm going to do these in the order in which I read them. And one of the best books I read first, which is so fun. And it was Eleanor of Avignon by Elizabeth Delosier. And the number one thing that was so fun about this is this was so highly anticipated for me to read, and it didn't disappoint at all, which is so nice when that happens. I had hugely high expectations, and they were met. It was wonderful. The year's 1347. We're in Avignon, which is in France. Eleanor is our main character. She's youngish. I think she's about 19. I don't remember if we ever got an actual age from her. She is a healer, and she's still kind of muddling through it though, because her mother was an amazing healer, but her mother has recently died in childbirth. And so she's kind of muddling through her life with her father and her sister and living in Avignon. Now, it's the time period in Avignon when the Pope lives there, which I remember learning about because I went to Catholic school for almost my entire life. Every single grade except kindergarten, including my master's. So I remember learning about this. But the Pope is in Avignon. The plague is coming. I love a healer during a plague. Eleanor is not only like a healer, she's also a midwife, but she begins to form this relationship with this man who's like a physician who kind of takes her under his wing and is like, we're going to figure out this plague. This book was so beautifully written. When I started it, I thought to myself, oh no, this is going to take me a really long time to read because I am going to read every single word slowly because it's so unbelievably well written. And then I read it in like 2 days because I just read all day because I didn't want to put it down. I just loved it. This is definitely going to be on my best books of the year list. Great. Next, I read a novella by Nevo called Don't Sleep with the Dead. This is a companion book to her novel, The Chosen and the Beautiful, which is a Great Gatsby retelling. In this book, we are about 30 years, I want to say. I could actually figure it out because it's summer 2022 is when The Great Gatsby took place. And this takes place on the eve of the Second World War in New York. So the United States got in 1941. So it's a little under 20 years since The Great Gatsby took place. Nick Carraway is our narrator, as he is in The Great Gatsby, and I assume in Don't Sleep with the Dead. And this book is kind of hard to describe beyond that. People have begun seeing ghosts, mostly ghosts of soldiers who have died or just kind of appearing, but Nick is seeing Jay Gatsby. Here's what I loved about this book. No one really writes magic like Nevo, in my opinion. Her magic systems are so unique compared to anything else I've read that I find it fascinating how she sort of weaves these worlds together. That's the same way I felt when I read her book, The Siren Queen, that she's just so creative in how she writes magic that it's really enjoyable to read. Now, the downside is I bought this because I Googled real quickly if you could read this without having read The Chosen and the Beautiful, because I haven't, and it said yes, and I don't think it's as enjoyable. So I felt pretty lost the whole time. Honestly, if it was a full-length book, I don't think I would be able to finish it with how lost I felt, but it's only 101 pages. So I was like, well, I'll just finish it. In that way, I think it's hard for me to actually like give you an honest review of it because I do think I needed to read The Chosen and the Beautiful in order to get everything out of this that I could, because things that were happening sort of like felt so emotional, but they didn't feel that emotional to me. I think because I hadn't spent, a previous 300 pages with these characters. This is so fun for me to go through these because most of these are books that I bought for myself on my birthday, and I was like freaking out about the order in which I was going to read them. And now I'm having fun going back through them, looking at the order I did actually read them in. The third book I read was Saltwater by Katie Hayes. I had not heard about this book, picked it up because I absolutely adored The Cloisters, which I think came out in fall 2023, I think is when that came out. I don't think it was 2024. So I was like, I'm gonna grab Saltwater. I'm sure it's gonna love it. I'm gonna love it. This is one of those books that has multiple timelines. We have Helen as one of our narrators, and she is the daughter of a woman who died a long time ago. Helen's in her 30s, and I think her mom died when she was 5. And she died on the island of Capri, which is like a rich people playground in Italy. And Helen is part of this extremely wealthy family that she kind of can't get away from, and they sort of control her in every aspect, so she has no way to get away from them. The book jumps back and forth between present day, where Helen is trying to figure out what happened to her mom when she died in Capri. It was ruled an accident. Helen doesn't necessarily believe that. She has weird relatives. She doesn't have a good relationship with anyone in her family. And then we go back to the year that her mom died, it's 1992. So we go back to 1992 and we kind of look at the family dynamics in 1992. This was classified as a thriller. I would actually classify it as a gothic fiction, even though the setting's not gothic. The pace of the book is very much gothic fiction and not thriller. A difficult thing I found with this book is it's very hard to root for anyone. Everyone seems like a pretty bad person, and there's no person who you're like, that's the person I want to end up good at the end. That's the person I want to root for, etc. I still enjoyed reading this book. I did not like it as much as The Cloisters, which I absolutely adored. But if you ask me, are you going to like a book better that's about rich people behaving badly on Capri, or about a woman working in a museum in New York about historical tarot cards? I mean, obviously I'm gonna pick the tarot card one, but I still liked it, and I'll still read whatever Katie Hayes puts out next. All right, let's switch gears and read a romantic beach read. I read Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. How do I start talking about this book? We begin with Persephone, and she is going to the town that was kind of like where her lake house was when she was a kid, and she spent every summer for several years. I want to say we start when she's like 11-ish. And we end the past period when she's 17 or 18, I think 18. And she's going for Sam's mom's funeral. And Sam was like her best friend, is how the book begins. And you can tell there's something terrible that happened between the two of them. So then the book goes back and forth. We get a chapter in present day when they're like 30, and we get a chapter in the past where their ages are ranging from 11 to 18. Okay, I filmed something that I'm actually cutting out because it was too spoilery. There's a love triangle between Persephone, Charlie, and Sam. Sam and Charlie are siblings. I don't like books that have love triangles where there is a person who is interested romantically in siblings, because I don't think that can ever end happily. This obviously has an HEA, and it has a lot of drama to get to that HEA, which I don't buy as a realistic ending to a book. I know it's not real. I know it's a story. So that was hard for me. Also, the chapters where they're in the past are basically YA romance, which I don't really like YA romance, so this definitely wasn't a read for me. Which made me a little sad because I did like Carly Fortune's writing style, and I read this book really quickly. So I might in the future pick up another one of hers, but I will just look more carefully at what the plot is. Okay, moving on away from contemporary romance and back to the Roman Empire. The next book I read was The Mistress of Rome by Kate Quinn. This is a multi-narrator story that takes place very early in the Roman Empire. We're in like the double-digit years. We're in the 80s, but we go into the 90s at some point because this book takes place over about 20 years. We follow multiple people. Our main narrator, whose voice I enjoyed the most, was Thea. And Thea starts as a slave living in a wealthy Roman household, and she's like kind of like a lady's maid to Lepida, who is awful. And then we also follow Arius, who's a gladiator. And there's a bunch of other main characters. Lepida's husband, Lepida's husband's son from another marriage, Lepida's daughter, Thea's son at one point. There's a lot of characters in this book. We kind of jump around whose head we're in. It's very much like a third person head hopping book. This is a case of a book where I had very high expectations that weren't necessarily met. I thought I was going to absolutely adore this book, and it was a little bit of a slower read for me. I think part of the difficulty I had was Lepida is so awful, and she's a huge narration portion of this book. She's probably over 30% narration of the book. And I really hated her chapters. She had nothing about her that made you want to root for her. I'm going to give you an example. If you watched Game of Thrones, Cersei Lannister is a terrible character. But then when the shame thing happens, you start to think, well, I didn't want that to happen. I didn't want her to have to go through that. And so it kind of twists how you feel about that really awful character. There's nothing in this that twists how you feel about Lepida where you suddenly feel for her. The entire time you feel like that's an awful human being and I hope something terrible happens to her. So that made it a little bit of a harder read. I think I might have enjoyed this book more in like the 2010-ish era when I was really into the show Spartacus that was on Starz, and I was really into Rome on HBO because it definitely felt like it fit in that time period. And I just it didn't grab me as much as I wanted to. I'm actually going to look up the publication. Yeah, this came out in 2010. So Rome was very hot then, like in the world. So that makes sense to me. This is a quartet I am not going to continue it. As much as I do love reading about the Roman Empire, it was just not what I wanted to read at this time. I didn't give it a bad rating though. I still thought it was a good book. It just wasn't like a new favorite, which is what I was hoping for. Next, I read an ebook. So obviously I don't have a physical copy of it, but it's Common Thread by Jennifer Lynn. This is book 3 in the Weston Ranch series. And this was a really fun, like cozy, heartwarming contemporary romance. It's about Matt and Vanessa, and they are both stuck on a ranch in a terrible snowstorm. So it was like a little bit funny to read it in June, but it felt very cozy. And I actually read some of this when I was in Oregon and it was quite cold, so it worked. In the earlier books in the series, you've met both of them kind of briefly. Vanessa is the ex-girlfriend of the hero from book 1, and she's best friends with the hero in book 2. Matt, you meet just for a second at the end of book 2. He is like the long lost half brother of the hero from book 1. So we start off and there's like a lot of tension with both of those characters being on this ranch, which they are there for Taylor, who's the main character of book 2's wedding. Matt immediately gets a horrible head injury. A piece of a building collapses and gives him a concussion. Vanessa is currently not working as a nurse. And so she sort of gets thrown into this. You have to take care of this guy. And you're also stuck on this ranch, and she hates being there. She has very bad memories from when she was dating the hero from book 1, and she just doesn't want to be there. So then what you follow is kind of like a sick bed of her helping Matt get better and them realizing how much they actually have in common and how much they are actually attracted to each other. It was a very fun, kind of like low conflict book. So if you're looking for something where like the hero's not going to do anything horrible that the heroine has to somehow get over, I would recommend this book and the whole series. If you want, what is it, July? Start with book 1 now, and by the time you get to book 3, it'll probably get a little bit chillier out. Okay, the next book I read was a doozy. I read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Okay, I loved this book. It made me so sad I felt physically ill. The premise is it's Shakespeare's family. That's what it's about. It's about William Shakespeare's wife, his parents, and his children. And Hamnet is William Shakespeare's son who died at age 11. Now, books like that, I mean, obviously a child death is really hard. I have a 12-year-old son. So I think that kind of hit me even harder because you think like you like put yourself in the character. If you want to cry so hard, you should read this book, because I was at the point where I think it was about from 50% to 75%. I couldn't stop crying. This is a short book and I had to keep taking breaks because it's only 305 pages, because I just couldn't calm down, because it's basically about the death of the child from the point of view of the mother. It was so sad, but it was also like so beautifully written, really beautiful. And like some of the lines are just like sticking in my brain right now that are going to make me cry because they were just so well written. I want to like Google Maggie Farrell and see if she's, or Maggie O'Farrell, and see if she's gone through anything horrible, because she really captured that terrible, terrible grief. But it was so beautiful. And I do like a book to make me sob every once in a while. And I think this is the only one. I'm just looking really quickly. This is the only one this month, in these 2 months, that made me cry. So it's fine. Now for some books that didn't make me cry. So I read quite a bit on vacation. I read the end of Common Thread. I read all of Hamnet, and then I read the next 2 books and then part of another book. So I was reading a lot. But after Hamnet, I kind of needed to like cool it. So I read The Dark Library by Mary Anna Evans, which is an ARC, which I'm just checking right now because I don't remember exactly when it comes out. Oh, it did come out. It came out June 24th. I knew it was coming out soon. So this is 100% a Gothic fiction, though I think it was called like historical mystery, but I would classify it as Gothic fiction. We're in an old house that's falling apart and weird stuff's happening. That makes me feel like it's Gothic fiction always. So our main character is Estella, and we come upon her when she's back in her hometown in upstate New York after living and working in Boston. World War II has begun. So she comes home because her dad had a horrible stroke and then eventually died. And when her dad had his stroke, he kept just repeating the same phrase over and over the cliff, over the cliff, over the cliff. And no one could find her mom. So it sort of becomes believed that her mom either jumped or fell over the cliff before her dad had his stroke. And then her dad dies and she is living her life as if her mother is dead. Her parents had horrible debts, so she's living in their giant mansion, but like can't afford to. She's gotten a job at a local university, mainly because most of the men who are of age to be professors are fighting in World War II or doing something to do with World War II. So she's kind of working as like a temporary professor and making no money. And she's just drowning in debt, trying to keep herself and her solitary servant, who's basically like her best friend from when she was a child, living, like alive and fed. The beginning of the book starts with a man that Estella works with. She has a conversation with him and he says something about like, are you going to start having parties again? And she's like, yeah, we'll have parties in the library again. It'll be so much fun. And she's just kind of like being sarcastic because she can't afford to throw parties and her parents lived a very lavish lifestyle they couldn't afford. And then the man who she's talking to like 10 minutes later jumps off the top of the building and dies. She's like, what's going on? And so then she starts to kind of try to investigate into some weird things that have happened recently. There was a couple missing people. Another crazy thing that's happening is while they've dredged the lake the river looking for her mother, they've found 4 other bodies. And so there's all this like new mystery coming up of people that they thought were missing that are finally found and what happened to them. And I found it a pretty good read. Like it wasn't a thriller where you can't put it down, but it had a pretty good slow build of a Gothic fiction. I also liked the fact that it was set in the 1940s, but really didn't have anything to do with World War II. That was kind of a cool historical setting to have it set in upstate New York. And the only way she's really thinking about World War II is the fact that all these people who are usually here are not here, which made everything feel a little bit more deserted. So I liked it. The next book I read is one of those that's hard to review because I read it mostly in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep when I was on vacation, but it's called Bats Out of Hell, a Viking historical romance by Lily Harlem. I would say what I remember of this book, it was kind of bananas, kind of crazy, Viking romance, girl doesn't want to marry a Viking. We're in either like England or Scotland, I can't remember. And these Viking invaders come and they're basically like, he's like, I'm going to marry you. And so that's kind of where it goes from. It's the first book in the series. I don't know if I'll continue or not. Maybe if I get an arc because it was something nice and relaxing to read before bed. And it was very spicy. Now we can move on to some non-ebooks. Okay, so the next book, Home of the American Circus by Allison Larkin, is kind of a weird one because I started this one before I went on vacation and read the first 200 pages, but I knew I didn't want to bring a hardcover with me on vacation. I only brought Hamnet and my Kindle, and then I bought some books while I was there. But I read this kind of oddly because I read 200 pages and then put it down for almost 2 weeks and then came back and finished it once I got back. This is kind of a hard book for me to describe. So let me just give you the synopsis and then I'll tell you my review of it. So we begin with Freya coming home to New York from Maine. She has kind of run away from her family for, it's probably been about 10-ish years, maybe less. And her parents have both died and left her their house. And so she goes back under terrible circumstances. She's literally living in Maine. She has an emergency appendectomy. You really quickly realize that she doesn't have anyone in her life because her boss is the one that picks her up from the hospital, and he's visibly drunk when he picks her up. And then she sort of decides like she should maybe go see about this house and see if she can sell it because she has no money. She's working at a bar, and she's really hasn't created any like found family connections or anything like that in Maine. She goes back, and when she gets to the house, it's very clear that someone's been living there, which kind of freaks her out. But then she figures out that it's her niece, who she says over and over again is the person she loves most in the world. And she felt so bad she had to abandon her when she left. And so she and her niece begin this sort of like fraught relationship where they're trying to kind of put back together what they used to have. The book goes back and forth between the present time and then when Freya is a like child and teen, but mostly a teen, and the relationship she has with her mom, her dad, and then her older sister, who's her half sister. So her dad is her older sister's stepdad, and so they all call him Step, even she does. And then you also get to meet some of Freya's friends because she has some friends in the book who are like friends from when she was in high school that she's kind of reacquainting herself with. This book was a little bit of like a meandering story of a snapshot in time in a person's life. I didn't feel particularly like there was some plot that like grabbed onto you. The first half of the book is definitely slower than the second half. It takes her a while to set up everything in the town and everything that's happened in the past and how Freya handled it and how everybody around her handled it. Overall, I thought this was a fine book, but it did sort of put me off contemporary fiction because it made me realize that a lot of times I don't love contemporary fiction stories. It feels very realistic. Like, that's the best I can say is this feels like a part of a person's life who doesn't have a great life. And I don't know how much I like to actually read that, you know? But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people really enjoy this book because of the subject matter, and particularly if you had like a really rough teenage years or just have a really rough time going home, I could see this being a book that resonated with a lot of people. Next up, I read Only for the Week by Natasha Bishop, which is the first book in the Forever Falling series. This is a very, I'm not gonna call it cozy because it's in the Caribbean, so it's hot, but it's very like comforting, spicy, contemporary romance. It's pretty low angst and extremely high spice. If you're someone that you like your spice to start immediately, you definitely like this. And it was a very sort of like easy, relaxing read. We start with Dr. Janella, I can't remember her last name, Cross. And she is her sister's maid of honor, and they are going to an island of the Caribbean, I can't remember exactly which one, for the wedding. Her sister and her sister's fiance have treated everyone to like a week before the wedding to just kind of like hang out. But Janella's sister is a crazy bridezilla and is pretty mean to Janella. There's some weird tension because Janella dated her sister's fiance first. They dated for a little while and then they broke up. He met her sister and they had a very quick engagement. Like, I think they were only engaged for 6 months and they got engaged after meeting